This conference will now be recorded.
And make sure everyone is muted, please.
Getting stuff later today. I think I have, let's see, yeah. All
right. Okay. First off, thank you everyone for attending this morning's session here for the McHenry County Stormwater Management Ordinance amendments that were passed by our county board in September. As you know, this is a document that's been ongoing since 2004 as our first documentation of the Stormwater Management Ordinance. And we've had periodic amendments over the past almost 20 years here. The most recent ones obviously were September 15th. We had the comprehensive stormwater amendments back in 2014. And so these are just kind of touch-ups, a little bit of finalization, tweaking of some of the provisions that may needed some work. And then we will have on the line, we'll have Tim Bessiner, we'll have Sarah Solomon and Stoyan Kolev go over each of the amendments. All three of them have taken a little bit of the amendments and they will be presenting on those. And then I'll finish up with what we have on the kind of the housekeeping side of things with respect to our enforcement officers and certified communities. We will have some questions afterwards, so stay on the line if you guys do have questions that we didn't answer. By all means, stick around. All right. So today, we're talking about the overview of the amendments, the adoption process for our certified communities and our non-certified. It is going to be both. It'll be all of the above. Some of our cross-county communities are in a different boat, but by all means, we'll go over everything you need to know as a certified or a non-certified community to adopt the ordinance. And finally, annual report that is still part of our amendments or still part of the ordinance. So the annual report is required for all of our certified communities. So this is the cover. You'll see that the bottom is amended. September 15th, 2020 is when the county board did adopt. All the documentation is online at this point, so all of that should be relevant and correct. So if you do need to download any information, please go to our website and you should be able to find what you're looking for there. If you cannot, please let us know. We'd be happy to help you out. So of the amendments that were passed, we had about 30 of them, and there were some minor clarifications and revisions, some general clarifications, new and enhanced regulations, and then federal and state mandates. As you go through it, Tim will take some of the more simple ones, then Sarah will continue, and then going into Stoyan at the end there with some of our more heavy regulations that have been added to the amendments. With that, I am going to pass it over to Tim, and he is going to start talking about the documentation and some of the general permit and general overview. All right. With that, I'm going to share his screen. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay. Can you guys all see my screen?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Joanna, can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Bessiner, Water Resources Engineer 1 here with the county. The couple things I'm going to talk about are just some minor text changes and updates in the SMO, and then I will go over a new project type in our general permit 1, and that is a watershed benefit measure. So just to touch on a couple of those minor text changes, first of all, in Article 6, the language for a registered professional engineer was just updated to the current language of a licensed professional engineer for our floodplain management purposes. Second minor text change we had was there are about 5 locations in the SMO with a website link to the Illinois Urban Manual. That link was removed because it was incorrect and bring me to the Illinois Urban Manual's website. The third text change we had was in Appendix 12, our definitions area in the SMO, and the definition of floodplain. The term firm floodplain insurance rate map was added just to give some guidance on how to locate that firm map for McHenry County, which is given by FEMA. Okay. The last minor text change we had was also in that Appendix 12, the definitions area of the SMO. And that was just highlighting the language that was changed from the Natural and Environmental Resources Committee of the McHenry County Board. That was changed and updated to the Committee of the McHenry County Board that the Planning and Development Department reports to, just with regard to permitting processes and regulation of the non-certified communities in McHenry County. So those were the minor text changes, minor clarifications in the SMO. Moving forward, watershed benefit measure. This was the new project type that was added as one of our GP1s, a general permit 1. This was defined, a new definition in the SMO, as an NRCS conservation practice or a different approved practice that is used to mitigate the adverse stormwater related effects of development. So quite literally something that is used to benefit a watershed, to improve the quality of a watershed. If you see below, the flow chart, which has been in our SMO, was updated to add a new routine project. The bottom one there, number 18, is this new watershed benefit measure that was added into the flow chart, as well as a couple of other tables in the SMO that we'll see here in a second. Some practices and allowable watershed benefit measure practices, just anything like you can imagine at the right here, swell stabilization or agricultural ditches, any kind of wetland reconnection to floodplains, or enhancement or improvement of any wetlands that are in need of that kind of preservation practices. Similarly, any preservation with the prairie or forest, pollutant removal. Some things that the NRCS allows and regulates as watershed benefit measures are bioreactors, stabilization of channel beds and construction of wetlands, contours of buffer strips, as well as the implementation of drainage way water plans. They also regulate filter strips and grass waterways, as well as riparian forest buffers. So these are these two tables that I mentioned that were currently already in the SMO, but this watershed benefit measure was added to them as that last new routine project type. This first table, regulation of the routine projects, will just tell you whether or not the project can be exempt, which it's not here, and just where to find information on the general permit 1 or an individual permit for a watershed benefit measure in the SMO. Similarly, in table 2, this will just let you know which articles to look for to find the applicability or the authorization, as well as the terms and conditions for this watershed benefit measure. Looking into those terms and conditions for the watershed benefit measure, those are listed out here. Just to highlight a couple of the key points in this long chunk of text. This regulates things like the size of the project. It's up to 1 mile of a linear project to improve the watershed, or 1 acre of a project that's not linear in size. It's regulated by compliance with the Illinois Urban Manual, similar to a lot of our other projects in the SMO. It also speaks to things like the placement of fill to prevent erosion or other obstruction of a watershed or channel, as well as proper removal or dispersal of spoil materials on site. It also speaks to sizing of stockpiles on the project side, as well as how long those stockpiles can be present on the site. Finally, another key point is also going to mention things about drain tiles. If those are going to be adjusted, removed, replaced, that needs to be documented in the project description and narrative for this project. A couple of things that this is not going to authorize under the general permit 1 is going to be any fill in a flood hazard area. That's not in an effort to restore the natural condition of a watershed. It's not going to regulate a project that is only qualifying as dredging. There's another general permit for that. It's not going to regulate the relocation or channelization of a waterway like a river or a creek. And it will not regulate in-stream work performed beyond the toe of the slope of a waterway, with the exception of naturalized grade control. So that is what I have for those, for the minor text changes and the watershed benefit measure, new updates for the SMO.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to switch it over, and if you have questions, let's hold off on those until the end. I'm going to switch over to Sarah, and she will have this second session. Thank you, Tim.
Yep.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay, so I am Sarah Solomon. I am a water resources engineer with McHenry County. I'll just go through a couple new regulations and then the Bulletin 75 publication and how we just amended that into our ordinance. So I will go ahead and get started. So first off, we added 3 criteria in our regulated development of the SMO. And I'll go through a couple of those examples in just a second, but just to read through them real quickly. The first is any development in a deed or plat restriction that alters it from its original and permitted condition. Second, a development that modifies permitted developments between the date of the permit issuance and that expiration date. So all development except a major development, that would be 2 years. And then a major development is 3 years. We do allow 1 permit extension for anything except major, that's 6 months. A major development allows a 1-year extension. And then finally, the last one is development that is not completed prior to the permit expiration date. So this is final stabilization, any conditions that has been added to the permit. Just all components of the project needs to be completed. And if they get the permit extension, if that expires, then that still applies. So we will go ahead into some examples. So first off, this is the development within a deed or plat restriction. So on the right or left hand side, you could see Exhibit A. It shows that there's a deed restricted area on this property. And with the language, it says within these restricted areas, no structure shall be placed because it could interfere with the performance of that stormwater facility. So looking on the right-hand side, it's their after-the-fact work. So you could see that the circled in red, a couple greenhouses were added in that deed plat restricted area, along with some walkways on the bottom left-hand portion of the screen. So that would trigger the regulated development, and we would be able to enforce a stormwater permit for those structures being placed in that area. So moving on to the second addition is development that modifies a permitted development between the date of the permit issuance and before the expiration date. So on the left-hand side, you could see that there was a proposed ag building. At the time of application, they indicated that they aren't going to be adding any driveway. Nothing else was going to be associated with the proposed project. However, after the fact, you could see on the right-hand side that red area around the building is actually additional parking that they added out there, so that triggered the permit from going to a minor development to a major development, and then also requiring detention. So it significantly changed before the permit expiration date. So we are then able to, regulate the development and continue on with that. Moving forward, the last one, any permanent development that is not completed by the expiration date. So as you could see on the left-hand side, it's one of our stormwater permit cards that we issued for a garage within the flood hazard area. So with that, we require an as-built for compensatory storage and elevation certificate. So this is a situation where the permit expired in 2019. They did get a permit extension, but that has since expired. On the right-hand side, it's just a little detail from our permit software showing the inspection. So they actually did submit their as-built and elevation certificate by the date of expiration. However, it was not approved because they were missing some items that was required for the completion of their project. So since their permit expired, they received their extension. They would be in violation now of needing a new stormwater permit based off of this new regulation. So then some just general clarifications that we've added to the ordinance. So this is under the boundary determination requirements for wetland areas. So that's Article 6 of the SMO. So we just added some minor text changes indicating farmed wetlands on agricultural land within or adjacent to a development site. And so that's in accordance to NRCS. And then we added or USACE wetland delineation methodology. So then with that, we added 2 new definitions into Appendix 12. On page 129, it's just the definition of agricultural land, just clarifying that it's land predominantly used for those agricultural purposes. I kind of included a photo on the slide as well, just showing it's an agricultural area with some standing water, and it could potentially hold a wetland on that area. So then going into the definition of a farmed wetland, page 134, any wetland that has been identified as a farm wetland in accordance to the National Food Security Act manual and the current U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Chicago District methodology. So then some just general clarifications as well continued. We added under the water quality treatment section of the SMO Article 6. So if you want to take a look, it's on page 53 of the revised SMO. So we did add some language saying that all sites that increase any impervious surface shall provide water quality treatment, so that you could utilize an existing water quality treatment or proposed BMP or green infrastructure methods. So there's the difference between existing or proposed. So this is not authorized by a general permit, so that's 1 or 2. We don't require the water quality treatment on those. So we will go into some definitions. I do want to shout out on the pictures. Those are taken by Scott Kuykendall, our water resources specialist. He oversaw the installation of the rain garden at the McHenry County building, and it's actually really beautiful out there if you guys haven't gotten the chance to see it. But green infrastructure is a new added definition in our SMO Appendix 12, page 137. So any stormwater management technique or practice that reduces runoff volume through preserving, restoring, utilizing, or enhancing the processes of infiltration, evapotranspiration, and reuse. So then just kind of going into just another general definition, BMP is just land planning and engineered practices to reduce soil erosion, sediment deposition, and water quality impacts of development. That's also in Appendix 12. It's an existing definition. So moving forward, I'll go into some approaches that can be used. So some approaches include, but is not limited to the following. So this picture down on the right-hand corner is a picture of a naturalized detention basin with native vegetation in a subdivision in Woodstock, Illinois. And all the photos that I'm showing was provided by Scott Kuykendall, so thank you for that, Scott. So some approaches include some green roofs. I'm not going to go through everything. Tree and tree boxes, rain gardens, vegetated swales. So that's where, I mean, a lot of those are, you could utilize an existing BMP measure for the water quality treatment. So some of these might be existing on site, so making sure that they're maintaining it. So it's just kind of going to be up to the judgment of the enforcement officer to whether or not you're going to require something new, or if you're okay with them utilizing something existing. Wetlands, floodplains and buffers on site, rain barrels, etc. And so green infrastructure best management practices, these are just some examples that have been used around McHenry County. A bioswale, if you see the left bottom corner, this is at one of our solar farms that we just issued this past year, showing a pervious road at that solar farm, the installation of it, filter strip, infiltration trench, and then rain garden. So then we'll go into the federal state mandates. So the Illinois State Water Survey, ISWS, they recently revised the Bulletin 70. This new report reflects like the higher rainfall values, the water climate. So this was important in updating because the storm frequency and their distributions are important when determining, the estimates of engineering and hydrological problems. IDNR and IDOT has actually already been using this revised data since the beginning of this year. And same with FEMA, they've been accepting the 75 data for all projects and map revisions. So we're finally getting around to adding it in our ordinance. So any applications submitted prior to our September 15th date, they're actually going to be grandfathered into using the old data. It's highly recommended that, any recent projects before that date, they should use the new data, but since it wasn't amended yet, it's not required. So since that September 15th date, moving forward, everybody should be using the Bulletin 75. So this is just the picture of the ordinance of the old data. And then the new one, it's going to be in the same location, Appendix 4, just on a different page of the Stormwater Management Ordinance. The biggest difference highlighted in yellow, those are the release rates criteria for stormwater management facilities. So you could see in the 100-year 24-hour event, it increased by 0.99 inches. And then in the 2-year 24-hour event, it increased by 0.3 inches. Between the Bulletin 70 and Bulletin 75. In addition to updating the depths, the HUF distribution was also updated. So the original HUF distribution was published in 1990. So then the new HUF was revised, and the biggest changes, it occurred in the first quartile for the smallest areas, the 0 to 10 square miles, and in the fourth quartile in the largest areas, 50 to 400 square miles. So as you guys are aware, the curves are separated in 3 different areas, the 0 to 10 square miles, 10 to 50 square miles, 50 to 400, and they contain events for heavy rain events, so that's 0.5 inches or greater. It's standardized into that dimensionless form for time and precipitation. I don't know why it went back, but okay, so going forward, so these provisions affect several parts of the calculations for the stormwater ordinance, so runoff control, detention basins, stormwater management facilities. So like I mentioned, that's the 0.99 inch increase for the 100-year 24-hour and the 0.3 increase for the 2-year 24-hour. Stormwater sewer calculations and inlet calculations are going to be affected. So the stormwater sewers utilize that 10-year critical duration, and inlets use the 100-year stormwater event or storm event. Overland flow paths, again, that's the 100-year BFE. So with BFE determinations, like I mentioned, IDNR has already been requiring Bulletin 75. So people might have already been using that for BFE determinations, but under flood hazard areas. So that will affect your compensatory storage standards and then flood protection standards for buildings within a flood hazard area. The wetland hydrology will also be affected. It utilizes the 2-year 24-hour storm event, which, like I mentioned before, was increased by that 0.3 inches. And then just sizing of soil erosion sediment control measures will be modified based on that new storm data. So this isn't a complete list, but just a couple things that might be affected. And that was all for me. And I think Joanna mentioned we'll do questions at the end. So I will go ahead and switch back to Joanna.
Very good. Thank you, Sarah. Next up, we've got Stoyan, and he will talk about the rest of the amendments, except for the certified floodplain managers. Stoyan, you ready here?
Are you able to hear me, Joanna?
Yes, you're good to go.
Okay. All right, great. Okay. So, hi, everyone. My name is Stoyan. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to touch on one probably considered minor clarification here for general permit number 2. And then probably get to the big one where you guys will probably have a lot of questions, but and that's the adequate downstream capacity component. So let's just jump into the general permit number 2 section here. I've listed the article number there, portion of the ordinance where this is coming from. So if you are following along, this is where that language is located. So just a quick refresher, the general permit number 2 is for single family residences. And specifically, when it pertains to a home that would be located adjacent to a floodplain, a stormwater detention facility. In the previous ordinance, it wasn't explicitly defined in there that also flood hazard areas would apply. So establishing the BFE, making sure that the lowest floor elevation or the opening floor elevation, the flood-proofing elevations, etc., that those are all meeting the requirements adjacent to those areas. So as I mentioned, the flood hazard area was added in there. Specifically, everyone's familiar with the floodway floodplain. So it's really the flood-prone area here that sometimes can get missed by applicants. And so I have the definition there at the bottom, which for the flood-prone areas, so you guys should be looking out for this as well. Any trib areas greater than 100 acres, depressional areas, or any areas that are mapped by the flood of record, which you can always turn on through the interactive mapping that we have. And I think the one that we've seen most common is the depressional area. So just a refresher, and again, it's explicitly added now to talk about that flood hazard area, where before it was just mentioning floodplain and stormwater detention. So that's that component. Okay, so now moving on to the big one here. Again, if you have your ordinance, I have the area that I'm going to be talking about. I'm probably going to just move through the bullet points as listed. It's probably not the best way to explain this, so I might be jumping around a little bit. But first, the adequate downstream stormwater capacity, I just want to mention the intent of this overall picture is to safely pass the flow from stormwater detention management facilities, the discharge through downstream neighbors to an eventual endpoint, which would typically be a stream, a creek, without causing damage, erosion. That's the idea that we're going for here. So I'll jump into that more. I'll give some examples. Obviously, this is something new. If we had some examples from permits, that'd be great. So it's just a few examples that we've kind of brainstormed to provide some visuals and help you guys in terms of grasping what we're trying to achieve here. So the first component of this is the applicants will need to provide notification to downstream property owners and any drainage districts within the watershed. I should mention here the notification component does also show up in Article 5, Section E, Paragraph 3 of the ordinance, which goes through all of the application requirements. It's kind of, I wouldn't say hidden, but just added towards the end there. So it's kind of in two different places, if you will. So just keep that in mind. And what we're going for here is just some kind of, certified mail. Did the applicant actually reach out to all of the required parties here. So then the next component of this, as I mentioned, is the discharge to be conveyed, and we're going for either some type of channel, storm sewer, overland flow path that has this adequate downstream capacity. The applicant will be responsible for obviously providing the backup calculations, providing all the information, cross sections, etc., to show that this requirement is being met. And really what we're looking for is to be able to have the capacity to convey the anticipated 100-year stormwater runoff without increasing damage to adjoining properties. And that word damage there, as I move on, is important. The way that it's defined, you can find these definitions in the appendix, but it's a measurable rise in flood heights on properties unless it is contained within stream bank or recorded deed or plat restricted area. Area. So not only does this have to have adequate downstream capacity, but it will have to be deed restricted, placed in a plat, obviously for future access, maintenance, those type of things. So keep that in mind as well. That's another component. And obviously with the notification of the downstream owners, these applicants will have to work with these downstream owners through negotiations, et cetera, in completing all of these requirements. And then lastly here, I just want to touch on the drainage districts. If applicants are asking, well, do I have to apply to one, et cetera? We currently only have 2 active, and that's going to be Hebron and Greenwood. They're kind of in this area here. This map that I have here, anyone can find it. It's in the interactive maps portion for the historical documents. And I believe, I haven't played around with it too much, but you can go in here and click in each individual one. There are some documents there that people can do some research, see if it's possibly active. We do plan on also providing, as maybe more come online in the future or become active, some type of resource where that information can be more easily obtained. So if you do want to check out that map, again, here's the link. It's just in the interactive maps portion. Okay, so moving on here, basically, again, that notification component is very important. As part of that, what we would require is proof of this notification prior to any kind of preliminary PUD or plat of sub review. Or if, this notification can be provided at the first application submittal, whichever is earlier. So getting into some of the details here about how this is going to work. So the applicant should, and again, should have that primary outlet be a surface discharge. Now, in some cases, there could be existing drain tile that is available through a former field, and maybe that alternative does exist, but again, that adequate downstream capacity of that drain tile, also its structural integrity, and getting it recorded into a plat or deed has to be done. And also we would like this, to be kind of the last alternative if the surface discharge is not possible. However, and as I get into my first example here, what we have here is just a situation where we're just highlighting that maybe we're going somewhere from Harmony Road here down to the creek is really the endpoint, the tributary area and Watershed. And the reason we're highlighting this is it kind of touches on the previous point I just made. As you'll see, or hopefully you can see, there's maybe this overland meandering swale portion here that then possibly hits this flatland feature, gets into this, other low point here, and finally gets to the river. So although that is the overland surface discharge, potentially maybe a better alternative is to actually utilize some type of drain tiles. Maybe there's existing drain tiles there just because, as we mentioned, potentially releasing into this could cause erosion problems in the future, which could lead to the damage of crops in those areas. And I think that's the big component here, because when we're talking about damage, I think it's easy for someone to understand that, okay, damage to a structure, that makes sense. But quantifying damage to cropland, crop loss, that's a little bit harder. So just keep that in mind as if you're getting these type of applications, that, you know, this is why we highlighted this scenario. There could be multiple avenues where one is better than the other. Obviously, the downstream neighbor is going to have say in that as well, so the applicant will have to work with them to come to an agreement. And potentially in this scenario too, you know, assuming that this owner here owns both lots, you're potentially only dealing with one owner, whereas if you were to go through the overland flow option, you know, then the applicant might have to deal with a second owner here that, you know, maybe they're not on board with the whole situation. So that's the first visual. We'll jump into the second one here. And the reason we're bringing this one up in particular is there is no clear indication of a creek or stream or any type of, you know, flowing water body feature that we can definitively say, okay, that's our endpoint. So again, we just kind of picked the point off the roadway here, and you know, the tributary area, the watershed, it's coming down, and this is the point that it's terminating to. The reason for that, and if I were to zoom in and kind of highlight this here a little bit better, it is channelized. It does kind of open up, but one tool that we have on here is that historical flood zone to highlight the fact that, okay, this is an area that has seen flow in the past. We do know that. So, you know, ending it here would probably not be appropriate, although, again, maybe there is some opportunity for it to come down through here. This would be probably the most ideal endpoint for the conveyance for the adequate downstream capacity portion. And again, you know, this isn't highlighting that this is going to be through drain towers, just kind of highlighting the path that is one alternative that could be taken. Again, probably part of that for applicants to deal with is, you know, how many different property owners am I dealing with here, and how can I possibly simplify that portion. So just want to highlight this one as I am highlighting that this is the endpoint to the channel, and I will get into some of the definitions of how we're defining channel for you guys, but just wanted to show this one here for you. Another one here, and this one we kind of highlighted the idea of this is obviously an existing basin, but we have this black line here that probably in the old ordinance, maybe this is how it would discharge to this other lower basin. Maybe this is the you know, the topo here in this area maybe is suitable to come this way. Ultimately, the discharge point would be down in this area, or the end point, which is kind of this wetland ditch stream, kind of opens up into this larger creek area. So, you know, although the applicant is saying, well, this is my discharge point, I'm coming to this little pond here. Well, okay, what happens after that? So this is something that everyone will have to think about. You know, how is it actually getting to this point? It actually, you know, doesn't have a ditch or a swale. Maybe there is a drain tile. You know, we don't know. But what we're highlighting here is maybe there's a better alternative for the applicant to come into the roadway right-of-way, potentially an easier party to deal with from that perspective. Maybe the roadway already has a ditch. Maybe it needs to be opened up. It could be that maybe the topography doesn't work out. Maybe there does need to be some kind of pipe that ultimately connects to this area in here, which would kind of be the upper area for this, you know, wetland area for this channel. So just another example of, you know, this is the applicant, again, is going to have to provide this, but as you're reviewing it, just because they, you know, showed this and oh, I'm draining to a water feature here, just be mindful. We're looking for that channelized, that river, that stream, that area that's going to continue that flow downstream. So as I mentioned a little bit, for those discharge points, we would like to have that sheet flow. So using some kind of level spreader or other device just to eliminate that concentrated flow impact on neighboring properties. If there isn't the adequate capacity in that downstream ditch or whatever that discharge point is, an offsite outfall is going to have to be constructed with that adequate downstream capacity. And again, it's going to have to be evaluated to the nearest open channel. So I will get into that definition, but real quick, I just wanted to show the definition of outfall here. It's coming straight from the appendix. Once again, so it's a discharge or point of discharge of culverts, released conduit to development, and without causing scour, erosion, flooding, sedimentation, or produce any damage. So again, we're highlighting that damage component. So here is the definition of channel now, which I kept your pits and needles maybe, but it's any river, stream, creek, brook, branch, flow path, slough, ditch, gully, ravine, swale, wash, or drainage way with a discernible bed and banks, which surface or groundwater flows either perennially or intermittently. So if you guys remember back to example 2, obviously that perennially or intermittently component can be highlighted by that historical flood zone to kind of aid you in your review, showing that, yeah, okay, there's some flow that's been going through this area. It can potentially meet the definition of channel that we're going for here. And then adding another component on top of this, the discharge to any agricultural system, if it's going to be done via overland flow, it has to be conveyed 100% underground within 48 hours, up to and including the 100-year 24-hour storm. So I guess if this would be kind of similar to the dewatering of a basin in 72 hours, kind of the same principle, if you will, except this could be a farmer's swale or something like that. We want to make sure that water gets drawn down in within 48 hours. And then I touched on this a little bit about these offsite outfalls, if they're going to be constructed, if they can go in public right-of-ways or deeds or plat of restrictions for future maintenance, access, those type of things. So getting into one of the other components here towards the end is really what happens if the downstream neighbor says no, or maybe there's ongoing negotiations or things of that nature. So what the ordinance or what's been added to the ordinance here is essentially we would like for that applicant to post a 2-year security, which would be based on the engineer opinion of probable cost of the approved design for the site outfall component. So we're trying to ensure that the funding is there. There will be an additional 10% contingency. So as they work through this, if the project then goes, we know that the funding is available. If nothing happens over a 2-year period, nobody's making any strides forward, that security will then be released. So it's just kind of an added component here. For what we're looking for, we're not going to require the security in instances where there is an agreement established between the two parties of the applicant and all the downstream owners. That can be just a simple document that both parties have signed or something to show that, hey, we've come to an agreement here. In addition, all the plats and deeds need to be recorded prior to the issuance of that permit as well. And that's all, in the ordinance there. So something that everyone's going to have to work through. And and that probably might be the trickiest part for applicants to get through. But that's the end there. So, you know, that was the big section that probably a lot of people have a lot of questions. So with that, maybe Joanne, I'll throw it back to you, and we'll see what we have.
Thank you, Stoyan. All right, let's get back to this. So with that, we're going to move into the last component of the amendments, which is the certified floodplain manager. So similar to our certified communities, they're required to have an enforcement officer and a professional engineer and a certified wetland specialist on staff or on the employee or some type of contract. We have added a provision about a certified floodplain manager. A certified floodplain manager, that section has been added under the duties of the enforcement officer under Article 10, sections D, 3F, and D5. And again, the CFM needs to review and recommend any approvals for improvements, developments in the flood hazard areas. So that's both flood prone areas and floodplain. And as part of the overall record keeping, the CFM, and we need to keep records of who is the CFM that has authorized that development as part of the permit process. Similarly, the certified communities need to, as I mentioned, have that CFM on staff or under contract. And a lot of our engineering firms either have somebody, or it does not have to be that PE. It does not have to be the EO. It can be a separate person, although it can be the same person. The contact information, similarly to our PEs, CFMs, and EOs, if they change or if they leave a company, we need to have record of that within 2 weeks of any changes. You know, we've had a few turnovers this past year, but please keep that in mind. As certified communities are required to let us know within 2 weeks of that modification. And the annual report, and we'll go into the annual report in a little bit, but on there you will, on the actual paperwork of the annual report, you will note the CFM and their contact information. A new definition has been added to Appendix 12, which is our definitions section, and that comes directly out of the Association of State Floodplain Managers definition, as again, it's a certification for those that are proficient in analyzing and ensuring floodplain documentation is accurate and correct. And hopefully this will help our certified communities to ensure that we aren't building in the floodplain. This is a main component of the NFIP, or National Flood Insurance Program. So most of our communities are NFIP communities, and having a CFM doesn't hurt the situation. It actually helps the situation to ensure that we are upholding all NFIP regulations. So the adoption. So as you know, the county did adopt the ordinance back on September 15th of 2020. And all of our communities need to go and adopt the documents, whether you have amendments or not, where you can do it verbatim. And that needs to be done by December 31st of this year. Understanding that there may be some hiccups with respect to some of our communities not holding meetings right now. We'll take that as we go, but for the most part, if you can adopt these by the 31st of December, that would be great. Get us a copy of those documents. This will ensure that you stay current with your NFIP, and also the MS4 communities may get some credit for that. So here's the document. If you want to go online and get the template document, it looks like this. It's similar to what it has done, we have had in the past. So fill in the document. It's a Word document. You can copy it, paste it, whatever you need to do to ensure that your community is up to date and adopting the most recent ordinance. Some communities have adopted or have language in their code, their municipal code, that says that from time to time the ordinance will be amended, and that's fine. So we just need some type of documentation that your municipal code does say that, so you don't have to physically adopt this every single time we make a change. but you know as a community that this document has changed and you are going to administer and enforce the most recent version of that document of the SMO. And finally, the community's annual report requirements. These did not change except for the fact of the CFM. So everything else is still relevant. And we did add that language though onto page 93 that talks about who needs to sign off on documents or permits. That includes an EO, a PE, a CFM, and a CWS as appropriate. So in all cases, you should be keeping records of all of your documents that you reviewed. Similarly, variances and violations. Your certified communities can have the same company, or it's like not the same staff though, review and approve permits that a community needs to receive based on the SMO guidelines, requirements, and regulated development criteria. So again, an engineering firm can review and design, but just not the same person can sign off. And here is a copy of you'll see just the first page here of the template. You don't have to use this template to keep track of all documents and all permits that you've reviewed and issued, all violations, but this is available on our website also. So this documentation for the annual report will be due on February 1st, 2021 to our office. And it's very similar to what we did last year and the years past, but just you'll see on the Certified Floodplain Manager information in that first box there on the left. With that, I don't have anything more to add with respect to the amendments or the ordinance process or the amendments in general. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, or you may, I don't know if I can do raise your hand here. Okay. So we have Scott Kuykendall has asked a question or a statement here. So wetlands can be disturbed or destroyed by hydrologic changes, draining or drowning. Are there wetland protections under Stoyan's examples? Example 1 and 2 may drain farmed wetland. Example 3 may increase hydrology and drown wetland downstream. This may be counter to the SMO requirements of not producing damage to downstream system. In that regard, we do have the hydrology, the wetland hydrology, the 8150 rule, so to speak. So as long as you are keeping within that 80% to 150% of the 2-year 24-hour storm, you should still be okay. The discharge obviously would have to be analyzed. If you're going into a big creek or a big stream, the detention basin, if it should not affect or should not be outside of the boundaries of that 8150. Let's say if you're discharging into the Kishwaukee, obviously you've already got a lot of flow in there, and a detention basin's discharge is going to be very minimal, right, relative to the discharge from the actual creek or stream. As far as impacts with the pipe and going through a wetland, as long as it's solid pipe, there shouldn't be an issue. It would be a temporary impact as long as you replace the layers of soil in kind and vegetate as appropriate in native and wetland conditions. Our wetland specialist would review that as part of the development, but at this point, if it's not a permanent impact to replace a pipe, that would be considered a temporary impact. Let's see. So Steve Amon asks, what basis should be used to calculate adequate downstream capacity beyond the 1% chance event? Would it be sufficient to demonstrate that with detention, the peak flow is reduced? If so, what events would need to be considered? It absolutely is possible that with adequate downstream capacity, you could come up with a scenario where the discharge from a detention basin is less than the peak flow from just a normal site. So you would have to analyze that. Obviously, the detention basin goes through the 2-year 24-hour and the 100-year 24-hour, but a range of events would be necessary. It would be up to the EO to determine what would be possible, but I would anticipate you get your critical duration storms along with, maybe a 10-year, but ultimately you have to demonstrate, the applicant should be demonstrating through their engineering analysis to ensure that discharge is equal to or less than the existing flow from the site in a pre-development condition. And that has already been in the ordinance, that provision is already in the ordinance. So we're not trying to harm the environment, we're trying to keep it status quo or better. Hopefully that answers Steve's question. But yes, it is possible that you could engineer your way out of adequate downstream capacity. Eric, let's see, asks, Eric Morimoto from the Village of Cary asks, not related to the SMO amendments, but do you have any information on the latest IEPA notice of intent requirements for the NPDES MS4 program? Understand there may be some updates next week from IEPA via Lake County SLC. I am not aware. Eric, if you know of anything, or if anybody else on the line knows of anything, go ahead and click in the box and then I will let you speak to those. But as for me, I do not offhand know anything about that, but we can look into that and get it back to you or post it to the group. Let's see, Chris Teat from the city of Woodstock. Is the notification of downstream property owners only pertain if the proposed development requires detention, i.e. if the detention is not required, but a stormwater permit is required, do the downstream owners need to be notified? Historian, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to speak, and I can't remember offhand, but I do not think so. So if it's a trigger to the detention, the runoff reduction criteria. So if you are not going to be doing detention, then you don't have to notify a discharge, because that's where it triggers, is the discharge point.
Yeah, so in the ordinance, it actually comes up under stormwater management facility specifically. So it's at the end of the stormwater management facility portion of the application requirements, where it mentions that a copy of letter notifying adjoining downstream property owners and return receipt is required. And goes on to reference then Article 6, which is kind of what the points that I highlighted in the presentation were. So yes, I probably misspoke there. It's not the actual runoff requirements, it's the stormwater management facility portion specifically.
All right, does that answer that question, Chris? Hopefully. If not, we'll follow up.
It does.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any other questions? Let's see. Okay, so Brielle Cummings from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I do know for 401 water quality certifications, the applicant needs to request a pre-filing meeting 30 days prior to filing the 401 application to the IEPA. Brielle, do you want to expand on that? If you know any more. Otherwise,
can you hear me now?
Yep, got it.
So recently, I'm not sure how this pertains directly to the NIPD's question that came up just a couple minutes ago, but in our process, the core process for permit applications, if a project requires individual water quality certification, the applicant needs to request a pre-filing meeting or a pre-application meeting with IEPA before filing that water quality certification application. That was a new change recently in the past 6 months or so that impacts our process, but not sure how directly that applies to the other sections of the Clean Water Act for you guys.
Thank you, Brielle. And note that with the NOIs, there is a new portal. So if you're not familiar with that, I recommend that you do go to the EPA's website and check that out. If you have not applied for a ILR 10 lately, that process has changed. I'm not going to say significantly, but enough where people may be a little confused as to what's going on there. So keep that in mind. If you do have a development that is greater than an acre of disturbance, and the EPA does need to be notified through their ILR 10 process. Any other additional questions that we can answer? All right, with that, okay. Okay, so Darren Olson confirmed that there is a modification. Darren Olson with Christopher Burke Engineering has followed up on Eric's question about the ILR 40, that there is, for our new NOI, the communities are required to complete and submit if their current permit is expiring in 2021. So keep that in mind. There is some additional information for our communities that are MS4 communities. Okay, any other questions? Very good. Well, if something else comes up, by all means, our contact information is here. We will post the presentation up online, along with, again, the documents are up there. One thing to note that you will see a minor change to the actual titles or the chapter numbers. So the article sections and paragraphs haven't changed, but you'll see that previously we had a title number 15 throughout the document, and this is referring to the county's codification system and our numbering. We did have to change that to 17, so it shouldn't make a difference for our communities when they adopt, but just keep that in mind that that did change. No text changed associated with the entire document. That's just our codification system and how they changed up the chaptering and the numbering of that. But with that, I appreciate everyone's time. Again, I'm Joanna Coletti, the Water Resources Manager, Chief Stormwater Engineer here at McHenry County. I thank you for your time and appreciate everybody's assistance to make the county a great place with respect to our stormwater management ordinance. If there are concerns or if there are amendments that you would like to see in the future, by all means forward those on to us. We'd be happy to review those through our technical advisory committee, our stormwater management commission, and ultimately our county board. But with that, I thank you for your time and have a great rest of your week. And Brielle does say if you have any other 401 questions, feel free to email her at brielle.k.cummings@usace.army.mil. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.